When girls are not satisfied with the appearance of, for example, breasts or buttocks, and they are looking for one way or another to make their shape more curvy, they often find several solutions to the problem. First is to place implants, which I think is relatively safe because, it's still something foreign that you are putting into your body, and then a number of certain changes may take place. Second is fillers. I think it's important to understand what you're getting with fillers. They're considered relatively safe, but you're still only getting a temporary result. Some of the gel remains while the hyaluronic acid dissolves. This basically means that you become a hostage of the situation, where you constantly have to inject yourself with something every 3 to 6 months. And the third option is lipofilling. I give my preference to this option because here we can solve two things at once. Firstly, we are removing the fat from areas where it's not wanted, and secondly, we move it to where it's needed. And so, it's your own material, it's safer, and you'll get a satisfactory aesthetic result that you'll be happy with. In this video, I'll be going over lipofilling. I'll explain who this procedure is for, what problems can we solve with lipofilling, and what potential consequences we might face. Watch this video all the way through, and at the end I will tell you what negative consequences you can encounter as a result of lipofilling. Well, what is lipofilling anyway? There is the so-called building material, that is the adipose tissue. In this case, adipose tissue acts as a cushion for the skin and certain structures. And so, with the help of adipose tissue, we can solve quite a wide range of problems. Even to the point that there are some kind of reconstructive surgeries, let's say, on the face or the body, on which we might find, for example, some irregularities on the skin and so on. And we understand that this is due to a lack of soft tissues or that there are defects somewhere. And we can, for example, take fat from one place and correct this area, for example, by filling in a dip, depression, or some kind of aesthetic unevenness. This, in fact, is one of the options that we solve problems with, by using either one's own fat or with the help of lipofilling.
How popular generally is the procedure, and how often is it used?
Actually, the lipofilling procedure is pretty popular these days. And now, in general, more and more people are leaning towards lipofilling of one area of the body or another, because it is their own material. It is our own material, and typically it is safe and does not cause any reactions or rejections. I am sure that you have heard many stories about silicone implants, about how they don't get attached, and that they cause various scarring changes, the so-called scar contracture. I've heard different stories about fillers. This is also quite well known now, and there are various complications. If this story about lipofilling, about using your own building material, resonates with you and you'd like to avoid any negative consequences, then like this video. The second most popular way of using lipofilling, I would say, is the lipofilling of the buttocks, also known as BBL, which stands for Brazilian butt lift. In general, I would say that this procedure has become not just common, but mega popularized in the society, and not only among the plastic surgeons community, but also among patients in general. Because now in Brazil, and quite literally everywhere else basically, lipofilling of the buttocks is used. Using this procedure, we can not only obtain the so-called juicy shape, but we can also correct any transitional parts. So, for example, the ass, let's say, or the butt is connected with the outer part of the thighs. And as a general rule, women have these so-called hip dips at this transitional point where the butt turns into the thigh. And so there are these small depressions and unevenness. And usually when a woman puts on, for example, some kind of an evening dress or something else, looks at herself in the mirror and sees those uneven shapes, she starts to want to get not only her butt done, but also make the outside of her thigh more beautiful and graceful, so that these transitional parts, where the waist goes to the butt and then to the outer part of the thigh, becomes like the so-called hourglass shape, or as it's also known here, the Coca-Cola shape, because it's like a Coca-Cola bottle. It goes narrow at the neck and then has these curvy parts.
Is it really necessary to have a giant ass done, or could you possibly just do it a little, say, butt lift?
Well, it really all depends on the wishes of the patients. Of course, as a surgeon, I give recommendations to my patients based on what best suits their figures, their bodies, and especially their anatomical structures. Yes, their individual anatomies from an aesthetic point of view. Well, that's my opinion. But sometimes patients just come in and say, I want to look like this, and they literally just show it like that.
What's the trashiest ass surgery you've ever performed?
Well, I guess the trashiest was when I, in 2 stages, pumped 600 liters into a butt, which isn't really considered safe. Well, 600 is still somewhat fine. That's a total of 1200 liters in each buttock. Of course, it's not all at once, but at intervals. Because it's quite dangerous to inject such an amount all at once. There are a number of certain complications that may be encountered, yes, but in general, in 2 stages, it's possible. I've got now another patient who's also waiting for that second stage. I have also performed on her a waist shaping surgery where I pumped out fat and pumped it into her butt, and she is walking around now. She's happy with everything, but she says, well, I want more. You want it? Okay, we will do it. If you are looking specifically for lipofilling of the buttocks or in general lipofilling of other parts of the body and you live in Dubai or are planning to come to Dubai, then follow the link in the description and sign up for a consultation. There I'll walk you through how we can help you solve your specific problem, what best suits you, how to do it safely and with the best possible results. And we will be able to solve any task of making gorgeous sizes, the so-called juicy shape, or alternatively a nice, petite, beautiful ass, and correct certain areas to emphasize your natural beauty. Thirdly is the lipofilling of breasts, which I'd like to talk to you about. To be honest, I have often encountered all kinds of situations. It is mainly after reconstructive tasks, when, for example, one area or one quadrant of the breast or another is needed to be corrected. Or, for example, after a previously performed breast augmentation or a breast enlargement using implants. And it would seem that somewhere there is a little bit of a lack of volume or there is some kind of unevenness. Then in this case, breast lipofilling is ideal. It will allow you to get a little more of the desired volume, which, for example, could not have been achieved with an implant. And at the same time, it is the safest option. It can also be used to correct some unevenness. And that's where I think breast lipofilling is the perfect procedure for the task at hand. But what's important to say is that I haven't heard of anyone who's managed to get, for example, from 0.5 to 3.5 breast size using their own fat. Because when fat enters the body, it acts in a certain way. It shrinks. Of the 100% of the transplanted fat, only about 65-70% remains in the body. The rest just goes away. Well, I just haven't heard of such stories. Another very important aspect of lipofilling is the restoration of the so-called fat pads of the face, which, by the way, is very important. I consider it an anti-aging therapy. It's a way to maintain the youth and elasticity of our skin and so on. Because, as you know, the human face contains a huge amount of superficial pockets of fat in the face, or, as they are also known, facial fat compartments. And over time, as we grow older and as we start to show the first signs of aging, what happens to these facial fat compartments? They simply get smaller and smaller, atrophying and basically lose their volume. And how is this reflected on the skin? We begin to see some wrinkles, some sagging and unevenness. Girls often see it, especially on the forehead. They begin to notice it. And this lipofilling procedure is a great way to restore those facial fat compartments. By the way, which part of your body do you dream of working on? Are you even considering such a procedure like lipofilling, or do you generally not tolerate any surgical interventions? Share your opinion about this in the comments. By the way, the most interesting method of use of lipofilling is pumping up muscles, making it more visually telling. And in fact, this is widely popular among men. When, for example, there's a lack of muscle mass in certain areas, which is often the case with the deltopectoral region, that is the chest or shoulders, or even the latissimus dorsi muscles and many other areas. These fall under high-definition liposuction, where we remove fat from somewhere and add it to somewhere else. And very often we would outline the muscles and even do lipofilling of the chest or of the deltoids, aka the shoulders, in order to make a visually pumped up body. In fact, if I show you a photo, let's say 6 months or a year later, and mostly though, they do sports and take care of themselves and so on. And if I show you a photo from a distance, you would most likely not be able to tell the difference. It looks quite natural, but when you touch it or look at it in more detail, you can basically determine that it is a different structure. Our muscles are more dense, the subcutaneous fatty tissue is minimally thinned there and more rigid, whereas here, there's a little bit of all that. But sometimes there are really cool cases which are also combined with sports, diets, and various other medications.
Some men will ask the question of whether everything could be enlarged by lipofilling.
I'd say yes. And there are cases like that, and there are surgeons who actually do it. We aren't talking as much about the length as we're really talking about the girth. If you could actually make it fatter, then yes, it can pretty much be done. In principle, if you do it qualitatively and as safely as possible, you could make it girthier, up to 1 centimeter, I think, or even more. Well, you can quite increase the girth like that. Ladies, if you are satisfied with everything about your partner except for his tiny, well, I wouldn't say length, but girth, then send him this video and we can solve that problem with the help of lipofilling. And in general, if you have great interest and you want me to make a video on intimate plastic surgery, both male and female, then click on the notification bell, subscribe to the channel, and if I see the interest, I will definitely film that video for you. And finally, his carrot will become an eggplant. This surgery is done under general anesthetic or under sedation. It really depends on the issue. So if we're talking about the buttocks, then of course it's done mostly under general anesthetic. If we're talking about the lipofilling of the face and breasts, it is possible to perform this under sedation or so-called intravenous sedation, which is the local anesthesia, which is intravenous. It is necessary to take tests, discuss with your surgeon, with me, the treatment plan, and determine the issue we're facing. If we are talking about the face, then that's one thing. If we are talking about the breasts, then that's another. The same goes for the butt. We determine with you the places from where we take the fat. As a rule, it is either the outer part of the thigh or the abdominal area. For example, if we are talking about lipofilling of the face, then naturally we need less of that fat than for the buttocks. Then, accordingly, we, as I already said, can perform such a task under intravenous sedation. We make small punctures, take fat from the abdomen, prepare it in a certain way, and then put it back into the face or the chest. We carry out this mini access, that is, roughly speaking, if we are talking about the face, then these are very small cannulas, literally 0.1 to 0.2 millimeters in diameter. We make a small puncture with a needle, and this puncture in a few days, and sometimes even the next day, becomes almost invisible, with only a little swelling and the appearance of small hematomas in some localized areas. All these things go away pretty quickly and the recovery is practically minimal. You'll be able to go out in public in just 3 to 4 days, and no one will even notice that you did anything. You will be able to use makeup and cosmetics as usual. But if we are talking about lipofilling of the buttocks, then it's a different story. We're talking about quite significant amounts of fat, so it must be taken from somewhere, and usually this is done in combination with liposuction. That liposuction is typically the Lipo 360. That means that we work in a circle, from the front, from the sides, from behind. We discuss in advance the areas where you don't like something, the so-called donor areas where we collect fat from. We take it from there, prepare it, and through special punctures, we carry out the work using certain cannulas, both during the absorption and during its return to the receptive zone, which is the buttocks area in this case. It is also done using small punctures through which it is pumped in. However, here it is important to understand that this liposuction, which means the recovery will be considerably longer, you will need to wear special underwear. And well, this surgery will now be performed under general anesthesia. Yes, both take place in the hospital, but here you've got general anesthesia and slightly different preparation rules. If we're talking about potential drawbacks, then for instance, in the lipofilling of the face, it's crucial to have a qualified doctor performing this procedure because it's easy to see unevenness or the asymmetry of one half of the face. And you would come to get rid of this unevenness, but instead you ended up with even greater unevenness. The negative consequences on the butt, I would probably say, are similar to those on the face. Well, in general, I'm not talking about any serious surgical issues. It's mostly asymmetry. Because, well, we have performed this surgery numerous times and already have the needed experience, I wouldn't say we encounter really any serious issues. It's mainly to achieve a symmetrical result, just so that everything looks beautiful and juicy, and that both of the ass cheeks look the same. But it's just bruises, I would say. These bruises can sometimes be quite big and sometimes almost non-existent. It's mostly things like this. Well, also, there might be some inflammatory responses, but very minimally. I would say that's about it. Overall, I'd say this has got more positives to it than negatives. The main thing is to do everything symmetrically, neatly, and in the right order. Take fat from here, pump it here. Solve the specific problem that the patient wants. Most importantly also, listen to the patient, to what they want, not what you see. Although sometimes a little bit of artistry is needed, and the results will be amazing.